Today we have 4 wonderful panelists. We have John Borra here, who is a prominent figure in Toronto's post-punk scene. We're going to be talking a lot today about what happened in the 70s, made waves of what happened in the 80s in Toronto, and how everything we've been following along here has helped to shape what John's been able to do through his music. He was a member of Neon Rome, Groovy Religion, Change of Heart. John's also an incredible solo artist. You're playing later today, right?
That's right.
Yes. After this, if you're looking for something else to do. We have Kingi Carpenter, who's also our hostess with the mostest here at Peach Berserk. Thank you for letting us do these panels here, Kingi. I know a few of you have been here for the last few months, and it's been really great to be able to do this in your space. Peach Berserk has been a fixture on Queen West since the 80s, different locations, but still here, which is incredible. So I'm looking forward to hearing from Kingi today about how punk has also been a huge influence on this type of space. It's really important to be able to have places like this. They're rare in Toronto these days, where we can have mixed-use spaces where we have all kinds of things commingling, art, connection, community, which is happening here today. We have Nick Smash on the end. So excited to have Nick on the panel as well. Nick, your bio is impressive.
Oh.
Many things.
I paid someone a lot of money to write that.
Did you? Nick is an author, musician, also someone who has been involved in the Toronto music scene and art scene for a long time, has been an incredible contributor in terms of bringing together history of Toronto's post-punk scene, and you're also working on a book about hip-hop, is that correct?
Yep.
Incredible. Okay, we'll have to ask Nick about that later. And then we have Bruce Eves, also so great to have Bruce here. Bruce is going to help us connect a lot about art and punk today. There's a huge connection between punk culture and the art community in Toronto and so much more, so we're going to be talking about that as well. Bruce was involved in an organization called CEAC, which is the Center for Experimental Art and Communication, which was a really important organization around the punk scene in the 70s. Bruce is also an artist in his own right, a writer, poet. So welcome to all of our panelists. I'm so excited to have them all here today. Woo! All right, so we have mics as well today, so we'll just have to share them and pass them around. We'll pretend that there's cigarettes. No. Thank you for laughing at that. Sometimes these days you just feel like you want to start smoking again. The world is kind of a crazy place. All right, so Bruce, I'm going to have you start us off actually, and give us some context around what was happening in the 70s and how that all led into why we're here doing what we're doing today.
Okay, well, there are obviously lots of people
All right,
here.
let's see if it's turned on here.
You can use this one.
How you turned on?
I think there's that button there.
Okay. Is it on? Is it on?
Yeah.
There we go.
Yes, okay. Okay, there's obviously a lot of people here that were not around in the 1970s. So what I'd like to do is read a little passage here that puts the 1970s into a kind of historical context. And it's important to point out that there was a general para-Marxist gloss over absolutely everything in the 1970s. It was a decade that began with Leonard Bernstein's benefit cocktail party for the Black Panthers and ended with the publications of Bomb and Fuse. That sort of gives a hint of the edge that was going on. We at CEAC, we weren't doing anything necessarily consciously provocative. What we were doing was current. For the sake of context, let me digress a little bit. I can't help thinking that the economic malaise and nihilism of the 1970s in the West was both a reaction against the previous decade's utopian failure, while at the same time it was an interregnum to the rise of global neoliberalism in exactly the same way that the hyperinflation and nihilism in the 1920s in Germany was both a reaction to the catastrophe of World War I and a pause before the rise of political extremism in the form of Nazism and Stalinism. This is equally true of the distinctive art that was made during the 1920s and the 1970s. And it seems to be, as we seem to be tiptoeing toward World War III, perhaps more metaphysical yet awkward questions should be raised. What's the point of art during global conflict? What does it mean to even be an artist in this situation? So now, as far as the CEAC is concerned, the final location was at 15 Duncan Street, which is like a block north of King Street at the corner of Pearl Street. It was built in 1903, and it has in 2019 it was given it was designated as a heritage building by City Council, which means that the building cannot be torn down and it cannot be altered in any way, as far as I understand. And the next thing I want to do is I want to get like a historic plaque put on the building about the CEAC and about the crash and burn, but I think it's kind of expensive. CEAC, which stands for the Center for Experimental Art and Communication, was founded in the very early 70s. It started at 4 Kensington Avenue, then moved to 86 John Street, and then the final location on Duncan Street in the September of 1976 was the opening. What we did basically, well, first off, it was, as far as I know, the first artist-run center in Canada to actually own its own building. And this was made possible by a $55,000 grant from Ontario, which, you know, today that's sort of peanuts. I mean, that's like a down payment for like a dinky little condo. Then $55,000 was an absolute fortune. So this allowed to, you know, buy this neo-Renaissance building. And, you know, CEAC had the top floor, Crash and Burn had the bottom floor, which sort of half basement, and the 2 middle floors were pre-existing tenants, which unfortunately we're stuck with them because of the leases. So, all right, I'm going to stop.
Okay. Thank you, Bruce. So you bring up a lot of things there. They're all things that I want to ask about. When you're talking about that moment in time and what was going on politically and how that was affecting people's psyches, this is something that I think is important to remember, and it can be a little bit challenging if you weren't there to really wrap your head around, which is that the 70s and into the 80s felt like a very pessimistic time in certain ways, especially with this fear of nuclear war that was happening. But at the same time, when you look back culturally, it looked so optimistic because so many things were flourishing.
It was, well, you know, like in the 1920s, I think the art fed off the vibe at the time, and you know, and I think the work from the 1970s was like the best work that was being done. I think it was the last gasp of the avant-garde, and after that, everything became much more conservative and conventional.
Does anybody else have anything to say to that? I see faces being made.
Yeah, well, I think most generations feel they're the ones, the great generation of the best art. So I think that's what people think.
Well,
I think there's amazing art being done now.
Well, they're wrong.
Yeah. There's always, I think there's always new art, new people doing things,
Yeah,
in my opinion.
yeah, I agree.
Nick, do you want to say something?
Yeah, well, it's an interesting time, late 70s, early 80s for sure, because it was obviously the punk thing happened and it reset everything to ground zero all across the board. And for us, sort of coming of age, during that time, it was incredibly inspiring because all of a sudden we could sort of do all sorts of different things. And it was because of groundbreaking projects and clubs and things that were happening in Toronto. We didn't, coming up behind that a little bit, we didn't see that there was any barrier to what we could accomplish. So we sort of took it and we ran with, as you say, great enthusiasm. And it was a product of the time, but you can still see it here today as well, but it's obviously different from what it was back then.
Where do you see it now?
Well, some of the clubs I've been to, Houndstooth, Handlebar, there's some great places, Clapham, not Clapham, Dundas West, which are coming up, and all these clubs, they're basically dive bars, but they're fantastic because the bands, they want a place to play, so they're really hungry for the opportunity to do that. And you go to some of these places and they have cassettes for sale, they have fanzines for sale, and they're all about 20, 21. So exactly the same age that we were when we were doing it. And they had the same ideas as far as wanting to express themselves. So, yeah, it sort of comes around and it goes around. It's a never-ending circle.
Yeah, I think that's very true.
Yeah.
I teach a lot of silkscreen workshops, and I'm always inspired by the work I'm always inspired by the work that kids do. So many of them have a kind of punk rock look or gothy look, and they're making screen prints about social activism and causes they care about. It's very inspiring to me. So every generation wants to have their say and get out there like we did. We just had a great time.
Oh, yeah.
The late 70s, early 80s with punk rock was just so inspiring to start your own thing and do what you wanted to do and break rules.
And I would wholeheartly agree with all that, and I often say to sort of what Nick, just a sort of an exclamation part on what Nick was saying is, I always feel like punk rock and everything that came with it kind of broke down this big wall. And then those of us that came afterward, we walked through and we could sort of do anything, right? The 80s musically, I feel was like sort of very much in, you could do like what defines post-punk music. Everything that came after punk with the same, it was informed by the same sort of ideology, but musically speaking or artistically, I mean, it's everywhere. It's all over the place. You have everything from, deep sort of gothic stuff to bands like The Replacements, and everything in between. It was really, there's no sort of defining sound of it all. And yes, it did feel like, I don't know, for me, growing up in the 70s, music always felt like this barrier, something I could never do professionally because it seemed like you had to be so good, right? You had to be at least a certain level when people were doing like rock operas, and, it seemed like you had to be like a classical type player to even do it for real. And then punk just sort of came along and sort of like reset everything and said, if you've got the will, the desire, the love, and the passion, you can do it, right? And so that really did open the door for me, and I felt like anything was possible, and everyone was trying to do something new, something that was different.
That's so true with fashion too, because in the 70s, I first thought it was so boring, like big stadium bands. It didn't mean anything to me, and fashion was you'd be Saint Laurent or Chanel or whatever. But then I thought, man, maybe you can just break the rules and do it your own way. So punk super inspired me to start a fashion business in my one-room apartment. And you could do it without going to fashion school. You could be an art school dropout and make clothes. And do it differently, not follow the fashion seasons like you were supposed to, but just break rules. And I think and seeing what Vivienne Westwood did and using screen printing it just so spoke to me. It just was such a great, I don't know what I would have done without it, basically. Just all the energy that was out there.
It was great as well because we didn't really feel like we were breaking any rules. We were just making our own sort of thing. We got past, the major label stranglehold of the music business. And we loved the idea of, well, it's a cassette, stick a microphone in your rehearsal room, turn it on and bash out a tune. And then reel off a bunch of cassettes on your home stereo system and sell them at the next gig.
Okay, one thing that's not been said here is that the first punk bands, they were all art students.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I'm thinking here is the interaction between punk and the art world in Toronto in the 1970s and the art world today. The art world today is all business. What happened in the 1970s was, and I would go so far as to say that if the CEAC didn't exist, the crash and burn wouldn't have happened, period. Because the art world didn't give a shit. However, after it quickly became the place to be, that's when everybody started piling on, and that was immediately followed by all this rewriting of history and backdating and everything else, because they thought we were nuts for taking on all these bands. So
Yeah, I think that just to give some context around Bruce and CEAC's contribution to punk at that time is that CEAC did a collaboration with The Curse as well, the Raw War single, which is a really expensive little 45 if you're a record collector. It goes for a lot of money. I don't recommend looking for it.
I don't even have a copy.
But it was a very experimental piece of music or / performance art that you did with The Curse at the time, and with the diodes, yes. And I find this really interesting because you're right, there's a huge art school crossover in early punk history, and Kingi also went to OCA, right? And so there's this big crossover there, but it's also something that doesn't happen very often. These days, a lot of things feel very fragmented. And when you look at a lot of things going on in the art world, it feels like it's in a bit of a different place than what's happening in the music world. You don't always see those two communities colliding, which I find interesting. Do you want to speak more to that collision?
I mean, if then and today, if you wanted to make a proposal to a gallery, it would take months to get any kind of decision. Basically, what happened with the CEAC and Ralph Alfonso, basically, he came and pitched the idea and we said, sure, where do you want to start? It was that simple. That would never happen today.
I just want to say is on the idea of, I've always thought of the two as being very connected. I refer to what was going on when I first started playing as the art scene in Toronto. You know what I mean? The underground art scene in Toronto. It feels more like a lot more Warholian than it felt like what was going on Queen Street. There was, if you sat at the Cameron, you'd be your friend the poet, your friend the painter, your friend the musician. It was like everyone sort of hung out and drank at the same places, whether the Beverly Tam or the Cameron, wherever. And so, because I think there was a lot less of everybody doing all these disciplines, everyone sort of hung out together. There was the same, there was only so many places where you'd find like-minded people. And just one final thing for myself, as a young kid growing up in the suburbs, being, I loved my, what we now call classic rock and everything, and I think I had, pretty sure I have what they call ADD or something like that, because I always bucked against the school system. I hated reading, I hated school, I hated all that stuff. I thought poetry was uncool, but once I started listening to, once the punk rock switch flipped, suddenly I was interested in literature and underground movies and art. It wasn't just like my musical tastes changed. I felt like the whole sort of world of the arts opened up to me, and so I will always think of the two as being joined.
Nice.
It is interesting, it is interesting though as well, I mean, you sort of grow up, as John was saying, you're going to school and you're doing, what you're supposed to be doing, then all of a sudden you accidentally collide with this other huge universe.
Right.
And you kind of think, oh, well, there's a lot more to everything than what they've been teaching me in school. And that's where a lot of this sort of starts and evolves from.
Yeah, I feel the same. When I found punk rock, I just stumbled onto it in 1978. We went to England for Christmas, to London. Stayed with a friend just off the King's Road by fluke.
Oh, great.
I know, by fluke. And I went wandering down the King's Road, changed my life. Like stumbling into Vivian Westwood and seeing the punk rock people and buying fanzines, bringing them back to Toronto. And my best friend from high school is here, Susie Shepherd. And I was like, we're going to find punk rock in Toronto. And we went to a school that was not like that. And we made it our plan to go find the bands, didn't we, Susan? And it just changed everything. There was a scene, there was something fun. And if bands could do it, just starting in their garage, well, maybe could do that with fashion and art and writing and making a fanzine instead of trying to get in a big magazine. Everything changed. And you wanted to stand out. You wanted people to stare at you on the subway with your wacky clothes. Everything became so much more fun. And I'm sure you all agree.
Mm-hmm.
And going and seeing the bands and just getting into the Beverly or sneaking into the Cabana Room or Larry's Hideaway. And it created a whole community of people. Because we all were similar. We were all kind of rebelling, and we wanted something different and fun and underground. And we all kind of found each other, and we still all know each other, largely.
That's mostly because the scene was this big.
Yeah.
Right.
Right. I mean,
Yes.
that's where the difference is between then and now as well, right?
Yeah, I agree with that. Everything was much smaller back then. There was less people doing everything. But I also think now, the big difference between then and now is just the technology change, right? Like you had to actually, if you wanted to see a live band, you had to actually go out and see a live band. There wasn't even on like things like Much Music or whatever, which started in the 80s and, I guess made it possible to get access to music on your TV.
Good point.
You had to actually go out and see these things. You had to, be in the same room. And so,
Yeah.
a lot of people would just go out to Larry's or the Beverly or the Cameron or wherever on a Saturday night just because they knew that there was a band playing, not because they just wanted to see a specific band.
So it's automatically that much more social.
Yeah, automatically more social, and less people had access to everything. Not everyone had access to everything. You had to seek it out. You had to find the cool record shops. You had to find the cool, places to buy clothes and to see live music and, all that sort of stuff. Whereas now I feel like everyone's got it. We have access to everything, right?
Right.
Yeah, you'd look for the posters up where the band's playing. You'd find the posters stuck somewhere. Oh, the band's playing. And you'd steal a poster. They're super fun.
The gig posters.
The
yes.
gig posters.
Yeah. Kingi, you're speaking to something that I wanted to ask the panel about, which is this idea of suddenly the world opens up with these different possibilities.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question for Kingi first, and then I'll broaden things for everyone else. But Kingi, I'm curious, as a young woman in the 70s, what did punk present for you as an alternative reality that you might not have had otherwise?
Well, I didn't feel connected. I went to boarding school in Toronto, and I just felt it wasn't connected to anything. Luckily, I had my best friend who was here, but I was an oddball. Like, I didn't really fit in. I came from an unusual family, and I didn't like the music. I remember going by girls' rooms, and they were listening to Supertramp. And it just didn't mean anything to me. And you go to 3 Below to get your clothes, it's like, it didn't mean anything. I just didn't feel I had a scene since the Partridge Family. But so it just suddenly I found something that excited me and was fun, and it got me out of my school to Scarborough mostly, where most of the bands were, and we'd get invited to parties, like Les Trangers, are you kidding me? And the Valtones, and it just created a scene that was fun and vibrant and young and grassroots. People were making things themselves. You didn't have to wait till a record from a super band came out or clothes that were pitched from 17 magazine. You could do it yourself, and you could do anything yourself. So I thought, oh, I can start a fashion business. So that's what it meant to me. Changed everything. Just going to that one trip. And Susan and I were like, there gotta be punk rock bands in Toronto. We gotta find it. So we did. We just went hunting. So yeah, that was changed my world. And I'm sure so many people felt the same.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that once you start to look at subcultures, if you let these things shape your identity, they give you a completely different path in life.
Yeah, and it was okay to be different. Before there was like, oh, it wasn't like the girls, the popular girls. I didn't look like girls in 17 magazine or whatever, dressed in the right clothes. But suddenly it was cool to be different and to be stared at, and have your hair weird and make your own clothes. So I started making my own clothes. I used to wear pillowcases. But that's good, I'm wearing a pillowcase. And it was fun, and you didn't care what people thought. And there was a whole group of us that sort of got together, all the misfits. And artists tend to be misfits. So I started meeting all these people who were like me. And it was so fun. It still is, because we all kind of collaborate. Peach Berserk was always Misfitsville, and I think it still is. And that's good, right? You were proud to be different, and that and the grassroots creating things that you wanted, not caring, of following the established rules. And we need more of that, anti-corporate, doing it on your own. This is a really good time for it, and I think that will build. I'm an optimist. I think there's a ferment for that right now. I see it in young people that I teach. So.
I see that too.
Yeah, I feel it so much. I can show you pictures of what they make, you guys.
We've had a lot of people on the last two panels here who were very involved in the first wave of punk. But now at this point, a lot of you were also involved, as Nick said, you're kind of getting there on the tail end of that first wave, and those timelines are really important. They seem quite short because they are, but they're really important. By the end of the 70s, Toronto was changing, and there was a lot of infrastructure that had been set up by that first punk movement that artists later were able to benefit from. And again, I think it's easy, even today, we see it, the way indie shows are set up, the way there are venues that exist to cater to bands rather than the other way around. It's easy to take it for granted, but I'm curious if you'd like to talk a bit about that, and what was made available to you because punk happened in
I
the
will
city?
say one thing. When the Edge closed, the whole city sort of decided, oh, that's it. The Toronto music scene is dead. There were editorials in the newspapers. The end of a vibrant live culture was finished.
And what year was that?
Help.
No, it's okay.
81?
Okay.
81.
Yeah, sorry, I'm not.
You could be underage at that bar.
Oh, yeah.
That was great, because we could be underage seeing bands at the Edge.
But for us, we were just starting bands or fanzines. We didn't see it like that. We just thought, oh, well, then we won't go to the Edge. We'll go to the Turning Point. Or the Grand Room, all these other places that, we would always go to the Edge because all the best bands were playing there. But then the more we went to the Turning Point and the Cabana Room, etc., we discovered all these really cool new young bands who were they were desperate for a stage to play on. That's sort of how all that happened for me. And then it all changed when I saw them clash at the O'Keefe Center. That was just like the spirit of the audience, the energy. And I thought, yeah, I'm going to do a fanzine from that night on.
Nice.
Sorry, what were you?
What was happening by the time we're getting into the late 70s, early 80s? How had Toronto changed because of punk?
Okay, I see what right. So I like often refer to the first wave people as the pioneers, and everyone who came after as the settlers. Pioneers tend to they cut their way through the jungle, and the settlers come along afterwards, and there's a path for them, and so that's pretty much what they did. I mean, there were the idea of putting up posters. From what everything that I understand, reading in your book, for example, that even even a poster on the street was something to see. You know, would get your attention. It didn't matter what the poster was for. The fact that someone had made their very own homemade poster and you'd see it on a pole was enough to get people's attention. Meaning prior to that, there had been none of that stuff. And so by the time I came along, you know, and started doing gigs, first gig at the Turning Point, by the way.
Yeah.
The Learning Point.
The learning.
You know, that was already established. And, you know, to the point that the band that I was in, that I guess made, you know, the first band to ever really, you know, get an audience and make a record and all that, a band called the Neon Rome, we kind of announced our arrival by poster. You know, we put up, our singer made this poster that said, "Attention heroin addicts." And it had this whole poem written about basically saying, like, we're the new heroin, essentially, right? You know? I didn't write it, so but it got people's attention, and he put it up in all the bars and around on the street, and it didn't advertise a gig, it didn't advertise anything, it just sort of basically announced that we were here, and we were, you know, and it got people's attention.
They totally did. We would scour Yonge Street looking for posters in Queen Street. They were the best. Those posters were amazing.
Okay.
Sounds ominous.
There's a couple of quotes in Liz's book. I'm sure everyone in this room has a copy. I'm sure of it. That really contradicts everything that has just been said, because this was when all the psychopaths started showing up at the Crash and Burn. And here's one quote. "We were thinking that the RCMP ran the Crash and Burn, or actually maybe CEAC, to keep an eye on the new bunch of radical kids that were up and coming." Oh yeah, the Crash and Burn was a setup by the Liberal Party. It was in the basement of the Liberal Party headquarters. It's no accident that we were there, that we were giving a total fucking setup. It was an undercover operation which potentially to watch potentially subversive young people. I don't know if the diodes were being suckered. Okay, now my answer to this. A, CEAC wasn't founded until 1984. And B, the Liberal Party was a pre-existing tenant when the building was purchased in early 1976. In fact, we were stuck with them and their long-term lease and their below market rent. I'm sure the Mounties and the Liberals had a lot more on their plates than to worry about youthful brats with delusions of grandeur and ego-inflating so-called radicalism. We had a brief encounter with the Mounties a year later, but that was a different matter entirely, to say the least. The other quote is, "Who owns the CEAC? The people who owned the building had tons of government money. It was this rich Italian guy, and the family bought the building, and it was all very cutting edge and weird. The first thing that happened was the guys that owned the place, or the guys that ran CEAC, took off to Europe for the summer, leaving like an accountant in charge." My answer. Now, aside from the implied mafia connection, where does one begin to unravel these fantasies of aristocratic wealth and leisure, all the while unnecessarily bilking the government out of hard-earned proletarian tax dollars? There was no accountant. I forgot who was running the shop. My guess at that late date, it was probably the librarian archivist John Fakeme and Saul Goldman, who ran the video operations. Theoretically, according to this, we were whooping it up on the Riviera, or better yet, to avoid the Mediterranean heat, I guess we were imagined to be breakfasting in London, lunching in Paris, followed up by sex parties in Berlin. Such a luxe lifestyle, even then, would have been pretty difficult on my $75 a week paycheck. We were on tour in Europe. We were working.
I think I know who some of those quotes are for. I can recognize the speech pattern.
I mean, it's like ridiculous. They're ludicrous statements. They're just simply ludicrous.
But they're interesting.
They're interesting,
Yes.
but tons of government money. No.
Well, this is sort of, I think, this is what it is to also document these things, right? Because sometimes the myth becomes more interesting than the
Yeah.
reality, and sometimes the myth it overshadows the reality, and people forget altogether.
Yeah.
I'm curious to hear from each of you, is there a pervasive myth that you feel continues on that tends to become confused for fact when you look back at the Toronto music scene in the late 70s or early 80s? What's the mythological figure?
Yeah,
or
a bit too much emphasis on CFNY and teenage head.
Oh, wow.
Well, okay, we sort of kicked off in 1980, 81, and it wasn't long after that. I don't know, there was CFNY, obviously we all listened to and loved, and went to the record peddler to buy the records because of the spirit of radio. But also at the same time, there was CKLN, which was just starting out. It was basically a Ryerson campus radio station. But if you lived downtown, you could get the frequency. And then it exploded when it got boosted to the CN Tower, which was probably around 82, maybe 81. So it means the whole city could get it. And almost overnight, their playlist charts were mostly local bands. So the myth that the CFNY was responsible for everything is not right. Especially for us, and for John, and for bands that follow them.
There was also Brave New Waves, CBC show that, I don't know when they started, but that was a haven for me living out in the suburbs. It ran from midnight till 6 a.m. and that's where I would hear all sorts of stuff like Jelly Tambourine Band, Vital Signs, local Toronto bands, but being broadcast out of Montreal in the middle of the night, and they played all sorts of English stuff and American stuff as well. But these were lifelines to me.
You know what was also good is the new music on
Oh yeah,
CTV.
yeah. The new
My
music for
friend
sure.
Susie and I, we'd order pizza just to watch that, remember? We'd be all excited to watch it because they had great stuff on that. And where else could you get things like that in those days? So that was a great show.
Yeah, and this was also, once we're getting to the early 80s, the beginning of the music video, right? And much music coming along and setting up on Queen Street West as well. What were some other changes that were happening along Queen Street? I really want to talk about this big stretch since we are sitting here, and it's been such an important street for so long, but might not have been as well. I think this is another, I don't know if I'm overstating this, but punk really changed Queen Street
Yeah,
West.
Queen Street was just starting to evolve as a music destination. I think back when I remember Queen Street, it was mostly the Horseshoe. And then punk happened, and obviously there were lots of new places that were starting to open up, 79, 1980. But there was still, they were still a little bit out on the fringes. And Queen Street was basically a wasteland. There was a few places that we might go along to pick up some cheap clothes and stuff, but aside from that, there were no tapas bars or coffee places or anything like that. So when we started in the early 80s, it was pretty much a place where maybe you could find a cheap place to live for a while, above a shop, and then you'd go hang out in the Cameron or the Horseshoe, the Cabana Room. I haven't been living here for many, many years, and when I got back, I was amazed at how many new businesses had set up shop all along the strip where that just didn't exist back then.
Okay. I actually was away from Canada from 1978 to 2001. So, and I was only back like once or twice a year to visit my mom. But when I came back, I was shocked at how Toronto had changed. There's every so often there would be something that I remember from 20 years ago that hadn't changed at all, and then there were other John Street was I didn't even recognize it. It was it's in 1977, 78, it was it was deserted at 5 o'clock. And now it's just, like 24 hours, and same with Duncan Street. And I was like down there, the last time I was down there, completely by chance, I dropped by 15 Duncan Street just to see if the building was still there. This is before I learned that it has heritage protection. And just like, what is going on with this neighborhood? Right, and this beautiful little gem right sitting there on the corner, not changed.
Yeah, well, speaking of much music, that was what closed the Beverly as far as having live music. We were scheduled to play, Neon Roma was scheduled to do New Year's Eve, 1985 to 1986, I believe, and at the Beverly. And they said they weren't having bands anymore because the new music was moving in across the street. That had been an abandoned building. I mean, it was all boarded up, there was nothing going on in that building at the time. And that they were converting that second floor, which had been where the bands played, into more of like a pub thing to sort of accommodate all the people that would be working across the street and want to come over for a beer and stuff like that. At least that's the story that we were given. And so that was a big thing for sure. And then, and then just sort of one by one, all these different little places started leaving. I remember when what was the Sally Ann, turned into a Le Chateau. That was a very, that was like, symbolic in many ways, you know what I mean? Like that was a metaphor for a lot of things that was happening, right? What had been the Sally Ann was now Le Chateau,
We
right?
called it Le Crapo.
Right.
Yeah, well, that's what happens. The artists bring the cool things into an area, interesting things, and then business thinks they want to be part of it. And then they drive everybody out. It happens all the time.
Right.
Yeah, I remember walking home from, trying to explain that to people that are either younger or haven't lived here for long. Like Queen Street, if you walked west from Spadina to Bathurst at 1 o'clock in the morning, I mean, it was tumbleweeds. There was no you could walk down the middle of the road, kicking a can down the road and probably get all the way. There was no cars going by. There was, it was dark, and there's no like sandwich shops or sub shops or pizzas or anything like that.
I mean, the reason the Crash and Burn could get away with doing what it was doing was because the entire neighborhood closed up at 5 o'clock. There was nobody was there. Nobody lived there. Right? Nobody. I mean, there were no restaurants, there were no bars, there's nothing.
It's such an interesting tension to hold with all of this because the independent businesses like Peach Berserk, right? Peach Berserk was early on Queen West, and there is this crossover between punk and commerce that again isn't always obvious, right? We think about punk now as a genre of music, but at the time it was also the Peter Pan that Sandy Stagg was running in Toronto. It's also art galleries. It is these spaces, and it's bars as well, and bars are businesses too. But at the same time, it's inevitable in every city. All the neighborhoods that all the independent businesses come into and all the young people start to go to eventually get gentrified beyond recognition. But it's part of the gentrification process too, right? There was this moment in time for Queen West where it was a really amazing place, and it was I felt a long moment, at least for me being when I was a teenager, I'd come to Queen Street in the 90s, and it was still a really great place, and it was really different from what it is now.
But also, that's a lot of time. It's been a lot of time since then. A lot of new people have moved into the city. Everything's changed, but the other thing I discovered when I got back here was this little hives of really cool bars and clubs. I mean, Kensington Market has always been great, but it's even better now, I think. The Junction, it's also really cool. There's little pockets and different clubs spread out all over the place, and as I said earlier, it's all new, really young bands desperate for an opportunity to play. And, they do have the access to a stage, and usually a rambunctious, very young audience, maybe all from school, but they have a great time.
Yeah, a lot of the kids I teach are in bands, and they're in high school, and their bands are really cool. But what I find running Peach Berserk is people are really hungry for something small and indie and experience that's not corporate. So, and shopping local. So this is a good time for things like this and different things still on Queen Street, especially down here. So it is, I kind of feel back in the 80s and 90s when I started, people would come to my store and stuff, but they weren't kind of aware, like that they were shopping local or shopping indie. They might just like my clothes and buy them, but I find people more aware now of anti-corporate. Does that make sense to anybody?
Yeah.
Like, so there's almost a better feeling in the air. Maybe it's being woke,
Yeah,
I
that's
don't know.
true.
But it is good. Like I found I fought so much in those days. Like the city did not help me at all. They didn't care that some young woman wanted to start an indie business with art. They didn't care at all. They just taxed me as much as they could, made it difficult. Now the city and different things are trying to help things that are local. And yeah, is that true? I think it's true.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, I do. And people want to come here. People are hungry for something different and funky, especially kids. Like you should see the. I'll show you guys. Anybody wants to see. In fact, some of the screens you guys are printing are screens that kids made that I teach. I just keep them because they're so cool and so punk rock. You can make a tiny tote bag out of them.
One of the difference between then and now is that then everything was really cheap. My tuition at OCA was $500 a year. Now it's something like $7,000. I mean, if I was in the same position I was in now as I was then, I wouldn't have been able to afford to go to art school. You know, and I think it kind of, in a way, reflects the kind of work that's being made, because with that kind of tuition fees, that's only for rich kids.
So maybe you don't need art
And so
school.
they don't, you know, so they have no life experience.
I don't think you need art school.
No.
No.
I think you can learn it different ways, get together with people, apprentice in places
And
like
that's,
here.
well,
Especially
that's
now,
another,
like,
that's another,
But to his point, everything is more expensive, like
Yeah.
you can't buy a house, I mean, yeah.
right, you know, it's like, I mean, in 1978, I had a house in the shadow of Casa Loma. It was $300 a month. It was like a 3-story house, at $300 a month. And I had 6 roommates. And we were always a month behind in rent.
I have a question for Nick, because Nick, you have also written a book
Yes,
about,
the period immediately following your book.
yes. So I'm curious, how do you recognize, there is, and Bruce has mentioned this as well, sometimes there's this tendency to romanticize the past as well, or to think that things were better, but then there are realities, right? There are costs that have changed that are really no longer relative anymore. And the city has changed. You can't deny that there are different infrastructures and different issues that are happening here. So I'm curious, what are some of the things that you noticed when you were doing your book and talking to people, where there was this kind of tension between what really happened versus how people want to remember it?
I guess what it is, I mean, there is this nostalgia, people can get very romantic and whimsical about nostalgia, but there is that element in looking over your shoulder at history, yes. But, part of the thing I wanted to do with Alone and Gone was try and talk a little bit about more of the reality, not only of our own personal lives, and most of the people I grew up with that formed bands, a lot of them were living at home still, or had just left, were going to school, college or something, and that's how they were sort of discovering who they were. But it was just, obviously the thing was, of course, in the late 70s, early 80s, there was Reagan, there was Thatcher, there was a proliferation of nuclear arms, there was actually fear of someone pushing the button, in today's terms, we had nothing to worry about. But, it was, for us, it was incredibly scary, but also galvanized the inspiration and the energy for us to go on and do things. I'm speaking specifically about political bands like Young Lions, Les Changés, Youth, Rock Against Racism, who roped in all the new bands that were coming out at that time and making a conscious effort to try and deal with what the reality that we had to deal with. Does that answer that?
That's a great answer. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I'm going to open it up to audience questions. I'm sure you have some. Before I do that, I will just make a couple mentions. There is a merch table. John and Nick have brought some things. There's some CDs and some other stuff to go check out if you want to. And then once we start to wind down the panel after Q&A and after our discussion, we're going to flip the room over, and Kingi is going to set things up so that you can do some screen printing. She mentioned some of those screens she has ready. This is the fun part. You can have a drink, hang out, commingle, make a little souvenir from the day. So, that being said, are there any questions?
As long as you're making mentions, I got here late, but I just wanted to mention that I brought the original sign from the Turning Point.
Amazing.
Really?
So,
Oh wow,
Oh,
okay.
nice.
So you can also take a picture with the Turning Point sign.
Wow.
Thank you so much. That's
Can I say one thing?
Yes.
The first bar that I ever played, I was like 15 or either just before or just after my 16th birthday. It was the first bar I ever got served at. So, great nostalgia for me. I'll just say one thing about the merch table. I brought some Neon Rome LPs and CDs.
No.
Those are for free. Anyone who wants one can have
Did you
one.
say LPs?
I have some LPs now. They're 40 years old and they've been in the wrapping for 40 years. So I can't guarantee that they're not a little warpy, but. Anyway, yeah, you can help yourself to, and then the CD came out about 20 years ago, and so there's one song on there that wasn't on the record, and anyway, so help yourself to those, but the other ones I am selling, so with my name on it.
Yeah, great. Actually, before I open audience questions, that brings me back to something I forgot to circle back to, because Nick had also mentioned this, which is cassettes.
Ah.
So I want to ask the musicians at the panel, this was a big change compared to what bands in the first wave of punk were working with, right? We didn't have tape culture in 1977, and it was a lot harder to DIY it. And so one of the discussions that's come up at past events here is arguments about record deals, jealousies about who got what. But it was harder to put out your own album in 1976, 1977. So those first bands like Teenage Head and the Diodes, they were really up against different odds. And then by the time you get into the 80s, cassette culture really exploded. You want to talk about that a bit, about whether was it easier to DIY things, or
Oh, for sure. I mean, I mean, you could get a cassette made for a lot cheaper than you could to print it on vinyl, and I think a lot of DIY bands, it was more common for them to put out their first record on a cassette than it was on vinyl. That's what I'll say. I mean, I bought a lot of, some of the first albums that I bought off, or I got off of, local bands were on cassette, right? And
Raw War was, I have no idea what the print run was. My guess is it was probably the smallest number that was possible, but we were able to pay for it out of our own pockets.
Amazing.
Right?
Yeah.
So it didn't cost a lot,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it's now in the Museum of Modern Art. It's now in the it's in the Reina Sofia Museum in Madrid.
incredible.
It's how they got there is beyond me.
Right.
But
Wow. Wow. I don't have one either. So
Yeah.
Nick, did you have anything to add?
The cassette thing? Yeah, the whole philosophy changed. Yeah, your book goes into a lot of details about the problems and the arguments and the stress and the aggravations of everybody, the Diodes and Teenage Head that they experienced. And I think there was a general feeling in the music business, especially mid to late 70s after punk hit the fan, basically with Ramones and what was happening in New York. The major labels thought, we can take advantage of this. we can monetize it, we can make lots of money. Then they got bored of that really quickly by about 78, when there's only a few of those bands which are actually selling lots of records and touring, selling out venues around the world. And but the music, the labels just thought, well, we're spending a lot of money on trying to promote this, but it's not working. So, and then all of a sudden the scene shifted, and that's where we get the dreaded new wave tag, right? Yeah, new wave's okay, but you know, as far as the music business was concerned, that was it wasn't called punk rock anymore, it was called new wave. And it was basically a very sort of anemic, anesthetized kind of version of the attitudes and the creativity that we had in punk. A lot of new wave is good, a lot of new wave isn't. And it's the same thing as punk. There's a lot of punk that was good, a lot of it isn't. But that's the scenes shift. They shift really quickly. You know, if punk, new wave, we didn't really call ourselves new wave. The Rat Boys, Simon always used to mock the new wave heroes who were in the audience, you know, things like that. So, you know, we were separate from all that because we embraced cassette culture, fanzines, and we had a real cool little scene, and it was our own. We never once went to a record label. I mean, we would have loved to have been signed by Attic, or Ready Records, So we didn't even bother. We survived on our own for a few years, and it was a good laugh.
Thank you. All right. Are there any questions from the audience? Yeah.
For Kingi, a couple of questions. With all your students, do you encourage them to, if they are aspiring fashion designers, to start, you know, their own thing? Is it possible today? And also, this is such a great space. Have you or do you ever have live bands here?
Yeah, I love having bands here. There was a band here about a week ago. They were great. I live in the basement, so if I'm not invited, I just listen from down there. It's great. And I do encourage people because I don't think it's fair not to encourage younger people. So easy to go, well, it was easier in my day. But I really believe the future of fashion is upcycling, and there's so much you can do with that, especially with surface design and screen printing. And I'm very biased, but so there's so much kids can do, and there's such a wealth of ready-made, inexpensive clothes out in the world that are cheap. So make them into something new, and the kids are really into that. In fact, I have a job tomorrow at a TDSB school, and it's all upcycling clothes and using surface design and printing to make stuff for gay pride. And that's the TDSB. I think that's great. That's my job.
What's TDSB?
Oh, Toronto School Board.
Oh, okay.
So it's a TDSB job.
That's shocking.
I think it's amazing. So the schools really do encourage protest art and rebellion. I've taught in Catholic schools where they do silkscreening and protest art. That's kind of my specialty. And I talk about all the different protests through the 40s or the 20s or the 70s and all the different movements, whether it was anti-war or feminism or workers' rights, etc. So I've been in Catholic schools, and the kids do pro-choice. And they get away with it.
But that's a great thing as
And
well.
I love it.
Because they're also learning about history.
Yeah, they learn about history, and they learn the power of what you can say with screen printing. You know, and I say to them, okay, if you have something to say and you put it on a banner and walk down the street, you look kind of like a freak. But if you wear it on a t-shirt, that's kind of okay. You know, you get away with that. And the kids get super into it, and they realize they can have a voice. They don't have to wear what some suit and some dumb office tells them to wear. They can create it. And I think it's very liberating, very grassroots, very punk rock. And I can show you guys pictures of what the kids make, and you would be very inspired in how aware they are of different issues in the world. And I was just at a school in North Toronto, which I think are kind of richer kids. But they were so aware and doing such meaningful stuff. I did a big thing on my Instagram of North Toronto stuff. And I have tons more pictures. I just need time to post them of what the kids make. But is that an answer to it? Is that? I forget now the question. But yeah, there is a way to be self-employed in our world now. And there's tools we didn't have. Like the internet, it's kind of it's very democratic, the way you can have an Instagram and make it really good, just like the big businesses. There is so much that kids can do, especially with upcycling, future fashion, in my opinion.
Question for the guys in the bands. When you started playing, was the motivation that you had something to say, or was the motivation that you just wanted to get up and play?
Just get up and play.
Get up and play.
Yeah, me too, I guess. Yeah, I mean, for me it was, yeah. When I first started, in high school and stuff like that, I knew how to play guitar. I met some, other like-minded people that also played instruments, and so we started a band. But when I decided to do it, to try to pursue it as a career, when I was like 16, I mean, that was more, because I realized that, like, hey, I can do this. Maybe I can do this, I should say. Maybe I can do this, right? Whereas prior to, punk rock, I thought, I can't do that. You know what I mean? I'm not qualified to do that. And so, yeah.
Yeah, well, yeah.
All right, I have another question. Am I allowed to say?
Yeah.
Sorry, yeah. Do you have experience in this?
I know.
Questions?
I'm too curious. Being artists, all of you, how have you made a career during all the ups and downs? In music, obviously,
Sure,
with streaming, with writing, as we
pure
talked
accident.
about,
It's all a
fashion.
complete accident.
You live poor. You live poor.
Yeah.
And you
Because
accept
other
it.
people give up and they get a proper job.
Yeah, but this is more fun, and I've got a granny card. You just live poor, and it's more
Well,
fun.
yeah,
It's
I
life
often say to young
experience.
people, often, but that younger people, we want to pursue a career in the arts. How do I, get out from doing my day job and just live as a painter or a writer or a musician? And one of the things is what are you willing to live without? What are you willing to go without, right? If certain things like, I live in the same bachelor apartment that I've been in for 21 years, right? And, my overhead is low. I've always kept my overhead low, like Kingi was saying, be broke, learn how to cook. When COVID came along, I thought, I've been training for this my whole life. I know how to cook, I know how to live cheap, I know how to cut my own hair, I'm fine being on my own.
I think raising my kid poorly it made her so much more resourceful. Like, she pays all her own bills, she got a job, and I think it was good for her that we were broke a lot, where we had no money. And Digby would say, "Oh, well, we got a frozen pizza in the freezer, Mom."
Yeah.
And that's
Also-
not bad.
And also, I've diversified over the years. Like, I started out being a bass player in a band, and then, started playing bass for other people, like as a side person. And then, somewhere along the way, I started singing and writing my own lyrics and fronting my own band. And then I learned how to do sound, and then I've learned how to do recording and stuff like that. So having more than one income stream or one area where you're working I would also suggest that to anyone, right? Because unless you have one thing that's really working, right? Like you're a member of Blue Rodeo or something like that.
Yeah.
But even all those musicians in that band, they all do side gigs too.
Yeah.
No, none of them sit back and just go, "Oh, I'm fine now." Right?
Yeah,
And you're doing your workshops.
I
and
rent
going up
this
to
place
the-
out. There were 2 parties here
Yeah.
yesterday, a 1-year-old birthday party, and then there was a 30-year-old birthday party till 2 in the morning. You should have seen the destruction in here, but I get paid to rent it out by the hour. So you just diversify within your thing.
Crap jobs. A few years ago, I presented my CV to an art dealer, and she spotted this very multi-year blank and questioned me about it. And I said I was in jail. Nothing happened after that. But I thought, but metaphorically, it was the truth. Anyway, and canned a pension plan.
It's interesting though, because this is a panel of lifelong artists. You've all been at it all this time, and that can be rare, because you're right. Sometimes it's really easy to give up.
I kind of have to apologize a little bit for a brief lapse in being a lifelong artist. I was offered a job at Island Records working in the press department. So I was corporatized for about 7 or 8 years working for a man. Actually, there's some bad people to work for. One was Chris Blackwell, and eventually the other one was Richard Branson. So it's not bad to be corporatized by them.
But still in the field of music
Yes.
and the arts,
Yeah.
right? It's not like you went to work for IBM or
Yeah.
something, right?
Yes, yes. And I've also had gaps like that where I had day jobs, but eventually I started to feel like I was going to die. So I don't do that anymore. But yes, there are choices that you have to make for sure. Yeah. Are there other questions? No questions? Okay, well,
I can just say
Oh,
one
yes,
thing,
go
that,
ahead,
you know,
yes.
it's not really, well, it's more relevant, I guess, what we were talking about earlier, but musically speaking, the 80s, I remember once talking with Glenn Milcham, who's the drummer, and we were talking about all the different drum kits that bands had back then, right? Like, and he said, yeah, anything but a 4-piece drum kit, which is the standard drum kit that you'll find jazz musicians, country musicians, rock musicians. Of course, Pete covered it. He said, anything but the 4-piece drum kit. And I thought, anything but, that's pretty much sums up music in the 80s.
Yeah.
Anything but a standard chord progression, anything but,
Yeah.
a standard lyrical theme, anything but typical sort of instrumentation for your band, anything but, it was like trying to do something that was different, something that was new. Because punk rock really did, I mean, that changed everything. It was a real before and after moment. So I think my feeling is that, back then that, all the bands that came afterwards were trying to do something equally as new and forward thinking and, ultimately trying to make some art or something that was cool and that was new.
yeah, go ahead.
I've got a question about the term post-punk. Like, growing up in the 80s myself, I mean, I was always into what would now be known as hair metal. We didn't call it that back then, we called it rock and roll.
Yeah. We didn't call it post-punk.
That's exactly what I'm saying.
Now we were.
Like, what was it back then? Like,
Well,
you don't like the term new wave, that's kind of what I thought of it as.
Yeah, well,
it's all right.
no, I was just gonna say, I suppose it was called post-punk, but we didn't think of it as post-punk.
We didn't call it that.
Punk rock. It was punk rock with a jazzy, funky edge, So we stuck in a horn player.
Somebody asked you what you listened to, you said, I listened to punk rock with a jazzy, funky edge.
No, we just said, no, we listened to Pig Bag, we listened to Killing Joke, this is very early Killing Joke, right? Or the Old Pairs, or we referenced a bunch of other bands. I don't think you say, oh yeah, my genre is post-punk.
Yeah, no, we didn't really call it that back then, nor did we, I think alternative was, that didn't come along until that's how they defined like the Nirvana and stuff like that, but, that was also not, anything that was happening. Post-punk to me means anything that came after that original first wave of punk, that musically was trying to do anything different, but with that same ideology, right? The ideology of punk informed, it didn't inform hair metal, for example, right? But it did inform Pig Bag and Killing Joke and all that sort of stuff. So anything that was sort of informed by the ideology of the punk, but that came along afterwards. And it was an alternative to the mainstream. It wasn't like, that hair metal was mainstream. That was, like what you'd hear
But I
on...
didn't hear that term until probably 2002.
I know, but that was like considered
When did you
mainstream
start hearing
music
that?
and, what they were calling heavy metal. Anyway, I don't know. We didn't really call it anything. We just were doing it,
We got off our asses and did it.
Yeah, those terms tend to come afterwards anyway. Like people who were in the first punk bands didn't call themselves punk. Am I right, Chris? Right? It wasn't until afterwards that these terms get coined and put on things.
Yeah, no, I totally agree that a lot of those terms do come after the fact, and sometimes it's just because people have to label things, right? We need to categorize. It's just human nature to categorize. But punk, I do agree. The post-punk term is a funny one because I always think of punk as a continuum, right? It's 50 years later and we're still talking about it, and it has so many iterations, and everything traces back to certain bands, right? There's this punk family tree that you can make, but it is all under the same umbrella.
And I suppose also in 1984, let's say, or 83, you know, the direct continuum of punk would have been what we now call hardcore. I guess we were calling it back then too. So, but they would say that they're in a punk band. You know, I mean, I remember friends from back then that were in hardcore bands, but they would call themselves being in punk bands. So, I don't know. I guess it's a way of distinguishing all that weird stuff that wasn't like sort of musically speaking. You know, like Cabaret Voltaire does not sound like the Sex Pistols, but they're you know.
They had, in the early days, they had the same attitude, just
Yes,
with
the
electronics.
lineage and, yeah, so, yeah.
Good question, yeah, great question. Does anybody else have a question? Going once, going twice. All right, well, thank you. Let's give a round of applause to our presenters today. And thank you as well to all of you for joining us. I'm going to take a pic of everybody. Hold on. Yay.
Get that handsome guy in the back in the shot.
That's right. All right, thanks again for being here. Hang out, enjoy the screen printing, chat, mingle, come see us at the merch table, and hopefully we'll see you again soon, all right?
Great, now we survived, right?
Anyway, thank you for your contributions. Thank you, mate. Like,
Of course, lots of time.